the opening sine wave to that was a bunch of scientists. They put out an album of sine waves, early stuff, and apparently are uncredited on the album for that that piece of audio. But I don't understand how this is not a staple in hockey arenas, right? It's clearly a hockey arena song.
Well, it's 9:01, so we could just have the committee meeting.
Carried.
You guys are good with that? You want to on the item? Riley said carried. Oh, that wasn't on the item. No, that wasn't on the item. We have to talk about it still.
Tricky.
It's Riley. Riley did it. I wasn't not my fault.
I got things to do and people to see.
This is when the narrator comes in and says he has neither. Okay, so let's see who we got. We have, I need some more cameras on. Actually, you know what? I have quorum. So I'm just going to go. So welcome back to our planning committee meeting that we held for less than about a minute on Friday night. After our 10-hour and 45-minute joint meeting of planning and Build Heritage Subcommittee. So thank you to the members of the Build Heritage Subcommittee who sat with us on Friday. Councillor King and Councillor McKenney and the rest of us are all here. And of course, Amanda Conforti and our vice chair, Carolyn. My goodness, I'm blanking on the last name.
Quinn.
What?
Quinn.
Jeez, thank you. I wanted to go with a W. I'd like a W in my head. It's crazy. Okay. So we'll get back into it. Do a quick quorum call. Councillor Brockington.
Here.
Councillor Cloutier.
Present.
Dudas.
I'm here.
Councillor Hubley. Not here, but I think he's going to join us a little later. Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Councillor Leeper.
Good morning.
Councillor Bernard.
Morning.
Councillor Tierney.
Yo.
Co-chair Gower.
Here.
And co-chair me. I don't think Councillor Chantieri is with us today, so we will move on. All right, declarations of interest. I checked this on the other day, but I just want to check it again in case over the weekend anyone declared an interest or developed an interest that was worth declaring. Seeing none, I'll move on. So we left off, so we're on item number 1 here on our agenda, and we left off where we're at questions to staff. So I won't rehash everything that we did on Friday, but we'll go right to questions to staff. So I believe everything that we need here is here. Just looking around at the names on my screen. Leslie Collins is here. Sean Moore would be in that PIED screen, I imagine, when the time comes. So if you have questions, now would be the time to raise your hand to ask questions to staff, because I can't go to you until you raise your hand. There we go. Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, it was a good meeting on Friday, and some of the questions got answered throughout the day as delegations were there and by the hospital as well. But I do have a number of questions that remain, and hoping to go through that list now. I may not be able to do it all in my 5-minute timeline here, so I may come back on, obviously your discretion. I did want to start with the parking on the site. Obviously, it's a highly irregular site that we're dealing with, but there is some burial happening on the site, as I understand it. Not parking burial, but there's burial of aspects of this site happening. We had this conversation about trucks and loading things out and that sort of thing, and so I just want to be clear to staff. What is going underground in the master site plan? And can you describe how far underground it's going? What we are trucking out of there? I know, some of the facilities at the back end of the hospital are set to be put underground. So if you could just clarify on that, how deep we're going, that sort of thing.
And Mr. Chair, the parking structure that will come forward as the first phase will have the details on how far below existing grade, but the first level of the parkade will be, I'm hearing, should be below the existing grade. So the details will come forward in the implementing site plan. The other aspects of recessed or underground, well, there's the main, when you come up to the main road, internal road to the hospital, there's a emergency drop off that's underground, which matches the grade of the emergency services area. And then other areas are more recessed and bermed. So the loading docks off of Prince of Wales would be below the Prince of Wales elevation with the existing, with berming and landscaping, that a lot of retention will happen in there. So it's not underground. And then at the back of the hospital with the composite utility, or the composite utility, the plant and the parking area, there's an area of parking that's recessed into the grade. So underground is the main focus would be getting the parking garage as low as, to see how low that would go on the first level of the parking garage.
It's helpful. The underground central utility plant, how many meters are we talking about? Do we know, or what's the estimate there?
Yeah, I don't have, it's not underground, but it's more recessed into the ground. I'd have to get back with the exact details, and I don't know if that exact detail will actually come forward more in the phase of the site plan. Okay,
thank you for that. I'm going to ask Eric if you can just bring up slides. I sent you a few slides today. You did acknowledge them. Thank you for that. Now is a good time to bring them up, and they go through, just to planning committee members can indulge me, they go through the site plan as it is now, and then a previous site plan submission for the hybrid model that was being floated heavily at the conceptual stage. So I just wanted to walk through that with staff and just show another design that was done by the hospital, done by this group, to just show you the alternative there. So Eric, I'm not sure if you have those slides that you could bring up. Perfect, thank you. So this is the one that has been submitted to our city's planning office, the one you've seen already. You've gone through it. That's highlighted in our documents. Does show that Dow's Lake Station on the south side of Carling, I guess, as the pop-up, and a pathway through. But the next slide, if you can just go to the next slide, because you've seen this already. This is the next slide. That was the hybrid concept that was previously preferred by the hospital. The parking behind it was slated to go underground, with a green roof, and the connection with transit here through one of the main buildings was strong. The site itself, the disturbance on the site was less. There are other issues with this. Not every site plan has its issues, right? But I guess the point being, and the question to staff around this is, given that there are other options for site plan, not just this one, but others, why did we feel we should accept a design that does not integrate with our multi-billion-dollar LRT very well, and has the main hospital entrance sprawling across much more open green space, which we know is probably the biggest contention of the development? Why didn't we push for better to get them to take up less of the site, as we've seen many modern hospitals across the world do, integrate with our multi-billion transit system to achieve better results in our transportation impact assessment, TDM, get those buildings closer to Carling, like they had recommended for mobility purposes. We've had accessibility advocates reach out from the Ottawa Disability Coalition and also say, because of how far they are away from Carling, this poses a big impediment and a big challenge for people with disabilities. So why did we not push them to come up with something better that better met the conditions we initially set for this development?
So Chair, I'll start answering and then Sean will add to what I had to say. First and foremost, we explored at length the possibility of connecting the station on the south side of Carling, and it is not technically feasible for two reasons. The Dow's Lake Station cannot be moved south of Carling because south of Carling, the track begins to curve and it begins to move downwards. And you cannot put an LRT station on a stretch of track that curves or goes downwards. It has to be on a flat area. Not to mention the fact that the Dow's Lake Station also serves the population of considerable intensification north of Carling Avenue. So that was not feasible. So then we switched to focus on integration, which is not without moving the station. And we continue to protect for opportunities for below grade tunnels or bridge across Carling so that it can have that integration. That's on the issue of the transit integration to the multi-billion-dollar transit system. The second point related to the hospital configuration, and the hospital staff are on the line. This is a question that would have been good for the applicant, and they are on the line if the chair wishes to have them answer the question. This configuration shown in the slide was completely not functional from a hospital operations point of view. And when they ran this design through the medical practitioners and experts who run the hospital, it was rejected by them as a design for organizing the hospital and posed all kinds of operational difficulties. I'm not a medical expert. I'd rather the hospital explain that to you. The staff at the City of Ottawa and the National Capital Commission have caused the hospital to make numerous design changes to better embrace the configuration of the site, and I'll let Sean walk you through them. There have been efforts at both agencies, both the city and the NCC, to improve the design, and we continue to do that and will continue to do that. And with the council motions before us, should they be passed, we have further direction from council on reducing the surface parking lot impact and other integration matters. So, Chair, I know that's a long answer, but it's a topic that's come up several times. And Sean might go through some of the design changes that we did accomplish through the review process.
Thank you for that. I do, and that's why I prefaced that I know that each site plan has its challenges for either the proponent or for us at the city level. But the one we're ending up with is a challenge given how far it is away from our LRT. Doesn't need to go into the building. And those buildings can be designed differently where there's a straight function, not have to be that donut function, closer to Carling. There are other design concepts. So I want to preface that this one that was up on the screen is not the be all end all, but just that there's other designs that have been floated during this process, which would better integrate the parameters we originally set. And when I say parameters, I'm going to walk you through, because the council in 2018 went through several parameters and said, we're not going to lift the holding condition until these pieces are met. So the first one that they went through was the integration of the Carling O-Train future LRT station into the hospital and research facility. There's clear language. The second one was provision of high-level pedestrian and cycling connectivity throughout the site and with the surrounding areas with full accessibility for all modes of mobility. And that's where the distance between Carling and the main entrance comes in, because disability advocates are telling us that is not as accessible as it should be. The third was provision of parking on site, including underground. We're not seeing that in the main parkade, which was discussed in 2018. And the last one I'll mention that has not been met, as far as I can see, is the implementation of a parking strategy for the purpose of the impacts of off-site parking, not on the site. Because we know a lot of people will go off the site to park. That's just when you go to a hospital, a lot of people say, I don't want to pay for the parking. I'm going to park close by. You know, you think about Smythe, Clantra Cluche will know this well, of course. People park off site and they walk over, right? So they're going to be doing that in this area as well. But we said before we lift the holding condition, which is what we're debating here today, we would have a parking strategy for offsite parking. We do not have that today. So for all those pieces, I would like to hear back from staff of why are we okay moving forward lifting the hold condition if we haven't met our original council directed objectives from June 2018 on this site?
Mr. Chair, when we brought forward the zoning and official plan amendment, the tools that we had under the Planning Act to condition these was the holding provision. And when staff have reviewed the master plan, from my presentation, the master plan can deliver transit connectivity in those three different ways that we described: the pedestrian overpass, connecting a tunnel underneath, and or platform extensions. In terms of pedestrian and cycling, we've identified that there's cycling facilities that can come through the internal streets to Prince of Wales, reconnecting to our on-street cycling network around Preston to the NCC MUP pathway. We walked through the master plan, and staff are in a position to recommend that we lift the H, and we've replaced the H in some cases with conditions now of master plan approval. So although the master plan can demonstrate that nothing precludes the connectivity, it's the how. We've put the conditions in document 5 of our report, which would go further. So each site plan that comes forward now is conditioned. So it's rolled into, in some cases it's addressed, in some cases it's rolled into a particular condition to see how the details come out. We have to also think back, like this is the master plan. It's not a detailed site plan in some respects, although the applicant has gone into many details on dimensions and so forth. But because it's the master plan level, it's demonstrating at a level to staff that we are comfortable it can be achieved. And now we're conditioning the how and the detail through the implementing site plans.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's helpful detail because that new hospital area designation policy that we had discussed back, well, I wasn't there, but June 2018, previous council, was specific. This was for the master site plan, right? So that's it's helpful. Some of these I think will be held over to other site plans, but some of them still not met from what we said we were going to do for the master site plan itself. So. Chair, are we permit me more time here, or do you want to come back to me after?
Yeah, so I think you've been on committees that I chair before, so I don't really care about the time for councillors. There's either we just come back to you or you keep going. So go ahead.
Okay, thanks so much. So the other one I wanted to go into is the cost. We did start out on Friday talking about that as well. The city doesn't have an estimate for how much municipal taxpayers will be putting into this, as I understand it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I haven't seen that. There was no information on costing in the report. It was very light when it comes to that. So what is the anticipated spend by the municipality for the project?
So Chair, I'm going to ask the treasurer to answer that question, but I want to go back to what's before council today. What's before council today is an approval under the Planning Act. We don't put costing information on projects that are not municipal projects in planning reports. But that being said, the question is there, and I will ask the treasurer to respond on the municipal contribution.
Thanks very much, and thanks, Councillor, for the question. As we heard from the hospital on Friday, they have identified what they call a local contribution for their overall funding for the project, and that's a combination of, I'm going to say, a very considerable fundraising campaign, as well as retail and parking revenues and contributions, as I understand, from local companies and contractors, sort of in-kind services. And at this time, the city hasn't identified any funding. And I think what's important is that should the city consider such, we would bring that forward to council for consideration. So nothing at this time.
Okay. Obviously, it'd be preferable because we know if we prove this today, then we're moving forward. So obviously, it'd be preferable to have that information before that. Understand the planning implications are what is in front of us, but there are other implications as well for the city. It would be nice to just have a number. I'm not adverse to having to pay something for it, of course, as a municipality, but it'd be nice to know what that is and how much, because the costs can get higher and higher, as we've seen with other projects in the city. Chair, I did have a direction under the with regard to the discussion about the dark sky guidelines, and so I can put that in now if you'd like, or later. And I probably should come back. I'm sorry, my son was asking me for some food, so I gotta go do that for 2 seconds. But I will be back after, so I would cede the floor, and then I'll come back maybe and give that direction if I can,
Yeah,
and then jump on list.
We can just do the directions when we run through all the motions. I think people are aware of the direction because we did talk about it with the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada a few days ago. But we'll go through we'll reintroduce all the motions formally, and then you can put forward the direction at that time.
Okay, I'll be right back. Thank you so much.
Okay, Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm not going to get extensively into the site plan this morning. I think, my colleagues have seen some of what I've written, and I still have the same position today as when this was first proposed. I believe it is a mistake to put an above ground parking garage in Queen Juliana Park. And I'm cynical that space atop the garage is going to be replacement public realm for the space that we'll be losing. I'm also concerned this morning about the transit connection, that we don't yet have a good idea of how that's going to be accomplished. And it feels like we keep kicking that can down the road. And I'm concerned that in a few years, we're going to say, we just can't afford to do it, that it's technically infeasible. I'm really pleased that the staff, and I trust staff, are telling us that it is going to be possible, but that doesn't mean it's going to be implemented today. And I believe that we should be only moving ahead with this site plan approval when that is nailed down and much more concrete. But my sense, of course, is that this is going to move ahead regardless of those two considerations. I'm not seeking to have the hospital location moved. I believe that this site can be made to work, but I have to reject the site plan as it's proposed today because of that above ground parking garage and because we don't know what the transit connection is going to look like. All that said, I do get the sense that many of the motions that several of the councillors, including myself, have put forward are going to pass, and that will mitigate some of the impacts that this does move forward. And I did want to ask Mr. Willis or Sean, what is the effect, in your view, of the motion that I have brought forward? I've put a motion forward that speaks to a neighborhood traffic study with a certain scope that looks at parking. It looks at cut-through traffic up to 1.5 kilometers away. If that motion passes, what do you consider are going to be the next steps, and how might we implement suggestions and findings that come out of that study?
Chair, I'm going to start answering, and then Sean's going to add to this because Sean's been working on these details more directly. Listen, Chair, many councillors in the area have raised this issue, as have the community associations, and we take these concerns very seriously. When you put a facility this significant in any area, it will have traffic implications. Now, we have to remember we're taking a facility and we're moving it 1,500 meters east, so the traffic changes are those that are highly localized about the shift of traffic patterns in a very, very localized area and growth that would normally happen. But the hospital already is a big generator. But the councillor, we worked with the councillor, and staff support the motion the councillor is bringing forward because it is focused on those very localized impacts such as cut-through traffic and parking. And what we would do in the next phase is the hospital has agreed to set up a community advisory committee on parking. We recommend the hospital retain a consultant to develop a study that city staff, Mr. Giampa's team, will provide input, as Mr. Landry's team as well, on the scope. We recommend they consult with the community on the scope of that study, what we're monitoring, how frequently we're monitoring, and then as those monitoring results come in, That will get reported back to city staff, which can be addressed in our annual traffic safety decisions we make, or the community could also make recommendations to the hospital for implementation. And there may be further mitigation measures in terms of where parking is permitted, where turns are permitted, whether or not there's any physical modifications to the infrastructure. That will happen over time. And we think that this is an example of what was done with Lansdowne, as there was a lot of tweaking after the fact. And then I think, it's inevitable in a facility of this size that there needs to be some tweaking after the fact. And this is a very appropriate process.
And Mr. Chair, I would only add that this isn't a kind of a one and done where we have a developer doing a TIA or traffic impact assessment and walking away. We have the opportunity at each phase to go back and kind of truth test the findings and recommendations of the traffic study. So your motion will, coupled with the conditions that we have in the master plan, will allow staff to not only review that transportation study, look at traffic neighborhood impact study, work with the community, but on subsequent phases for implementation, like for example, after the hospital building, when a research building comes forward, we'll have the ability to then go out and have a TIA completed, a traffic study, and see what's happening through monitoring with the opening of the hospital. So I think it's going to be an iterative process as this master plan builds out to see the evolution of traffic and kind of go back and keep truth testing the traffic study that today staff are recommending for approval.
One of the facets of my motion is with respect to funding implementation. I can imagine that if the community's worst fears with respect to traffic volumes where there wasn't traffic volume before, and parking behaviors that are problematic come to fruition, that we might take a look at some relatively inexpensive things like turn restrictions, parking regulation restrictions, which are all fairly easily accomplished within existing city budgets. But there might be things like intersection narrowings with planters that are required in order to really dissuade traffic. And my motion speaks to the city making a decision that needs to be done and that the hospital will fund it. There's all kinds of planters that I would love to put all over the ward, and I can't afford them. They're remarkably expensive for a councillor's traffic calming budget. But in the context of this hospital project, they shouldn't be that expensive. Do you share the understanding of my motion that is my intent, that if there are things like intersection narrowings with planters that need to be accomplished, that you'll have the leverage you need in order to make sure that the hospital is the one funding those, so we're not having to fight at the city level about how to fund necessary mitigations?
So Chair, I think with the motion as it stands, it gives us an opportunity, because we were approving the master plan today. When we approve the site plan for the main hospital building, we can work on conditions of approval that allocate who's responsible for what. Things that are related to general traffic growth in the city are not the responsibility of the hospital, but things that can be attributed to the hospital operations, we can discuss that with them and build it in as a condition of approval. And when we bring the main site plan back.
The final part of my motion was with respect to moving the H sign. This has been a 6-year odyssey for the community and myself and for the city. When you are eastbound approaching downtown, the quickest way to get to the hospital and the least impactful way to get to the hospital is to get off at Carling Kirkwood and take Carling as a straight shot. The signage indicates people should be getting off at Parkdale, which is very clogged and a residential street. What is involved in getting that sign moved, and how does my motion help move that forward?
So Chair, I don't know if Mr. Landry's on the call, and so if I'll start and I get it wrong, someone from Transportation Services can correct me. So the province is the responsible entity that makes the decision on signage, and it works with local users to identify this. What we had suggested in the wording of the motion is that the city staff, in collaboration with the hospital, will approach the province jointly and make joint application to move that signage, because we agree with the council that those are reasonable. That's a reasonable ask the community is looking for. And as necessary, we'll report back to council on the progress on this. But ultimately, the province is the approval authority on that. And I think the motion before council is a pretty strong indicator. And I think, you know, if we were writing a letter to the province attached council's motion, I think that's has weight.
Okay, I'll take that as encouraging. One of the concerns, and Councillor Menard raised it as well, was with respect to cycling infrastructure. During our discussion on Friday, it was raised that, you know, a standard cycle track of however, you know, 1.8 meters or 2 meters is not necessarily going to be wide enough in order to accommodate the kind of traffic that we currently see through this site. You add to that the number of people who are going to be using cycles to go to work, and you know, the ambulatory patients, people going to appointments, etc. If we need to, do we have the flexibility to move into Preston in order to create the room we need in order to have wider, I'll call them, you know, micro mobility ways rather than a standard bike path?
Chair, I'm going to ask either Sean or Mike Champa to answer that question.
Mr. Chair, I can take a look at the cross section that we have on the master plan right now, but we certainly have the 3 meters showing for the cycle facility in the master plan level. There's always room. I mean, I'm sorry to repeat myself. I don't mean to. I know you know this, but at the master plan level, we're kind of a bit higher. So there's always room at the site, the individual site plan applications, to work out more fine-grained detail. And if there's more room within the right of way to create a wider MUP or cycling facility, we'll certainly work with council or councillors, the ward councillor, yourself, the bike groups, and residents on the details of the cycling facility in the implementing phases. So we can take that away and see what room there is to play with, and note that that's going to be coming forward from yourself and the communities on making sure the cycling facilities are the best they can be, replacing that current Trillium line location.
No, it's a tough spot to be in, because like the transit connection, that feels like another really important issue that we're kind of kicking down the road, and we're putting a lot of trust in the hospital and in the city to make that commitment to get it right. I would prefer to have that certainty today, but I don't think I'm going to get that. So with that, I will turn it back to the chair. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Steve. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. Councillor Brockington.
Thanks, Chair, and good morning to everyone. To staff, what kind of warranty are on new trees? If new trees go through a drought cycle and a number die, we want to see 2,500 trees here forever. What type of follow-up or monitoring does the city do on the new trees that will be planted?
Chair, I believe Martha is on the line. I'll ask Martha to answer that question, please.
Hi there. Can everybody hear me? So basically it will just be the same as what we have in other site plans, where I think it's something like a 2-year warranty period. And so that'll be monitored by the landscapers that put this in and replaced as necessary. Sean can correct me if I'm wrong, if it's actually 3 years. I'm not sure if it's normally 2 or 3. But the thing here is that the hospital, and I recognize that's a short period, but the thing here is that the hospital has an interest in maintaining the landscaping on the site. And so I would imagine that if we're looking at any issues with tree loss or any issues with the trees that are being planted, that it's in their best interest to be replacing these trees because it's part of their whole design. So that's sort of how I see that.
Yeah, it's likely some of the trees, though, are not going to be planted on hospital grounds because there isn't the remaining capacity for that. So when you say monitored by landscapers, whose landscapers will be monitoring these trees?
So, Chair, maybe I'll take a first cut, and then Martha can correct me if I do make a misstep. So typically in development projects, we hold securities on the implementation of city conditions. And this is also part of what we would use if the proponent doesn't take action on their own, the city can take action. Now, we're dealing with a public institution, we're dealing with a hospital. It's a very different than dealing with a private developer. And as Martha says, that part of the hospital's ethos in designing the site is to create a landscape setting for their patients and the visitors. So I think we're dealing with a different player here. But we certainly, the landscape architect who signs the plans for the implementation of the landscape has a professional responsibility to ensure that responsible, and they generally file their reports back to the owner on this, and those are generally again shared with us if we ask. So we can again develop. I don't mind taking a direction to develop a monitoring plan with the hospital on the tree planting. We can do that as a subsequent phase, and that could just be a direction, Chair.
We have seen recently trees on public property that have not been maintained, that have died, that have not had the care that they need, that many people walk by or cycle by and come to our attention. So yeah, I mean, if a direction, Mr. Willis, you think is a good way to go, I want to provide that, because I want to ensure that if 2,500 trees are planted, we get 2,500 trees. And we have to accept, yes, some may die, but that there will be an effort to replace those trees and nurture them. So maybe we can work on some wording and come back to that direction.
Chair, I recommend to committee that this is actually pretty simple. Just to, if committee just gives us the department direction to develop a monitoring plan in conjunction with the hospital prior to the main hospital building site plan, we can take that action right away. And I'm confident the hospital will have no concerns with developing a monitoring plan. Okay,
so Chair, can I just table that then?
Yep. Consider that direction given.
Excellent. Very well. Can we now have a staff comment on what the plan is for the transit station? We've heard from the proponent when I asked underground tunnel, overhead, bridge, no station on the south side. When will this decision be made, and how will either the Transit Commission or Council be engaged going forward?
So Chair, Mr. Scrimger's away today, so Ms. Stevens is available to correct me if I'm wrong. But we spent much of the weekend discussing this, and I've also been working with Michael Morgan as well on this issue. So we know today, based on the information we have today, that underground connections are feasible, above grade bridge connections are feasible. The plan is being designed, so any of these can be done. Now, there is some complexity on trying to tie in the Dow's Lake Station beneath the existing Carling Bridge to it today, and that's where an engineering issue. We need more detail with the next site plan to see if we can confirm that that's possible or not. We do know that the cheapest and fastest to implement is actually an overhead bridge across Carling, which has a lot of benefits. It would be connected by elevators for accessibility reasons, as many of our stations are. And that may be the simplest and fastest way to give everybody surety that it can happen, but we're still exploring the underground option as a possibility. I don't actually believe one is better than the other. They both have advantages. The advantage of a bridge across Carling, as I said, it's quick to build, cheapest to build, and it actually would afford some really lovely views. And it would give people coming out of the transit system a real sense of place, and it could be quite an interesting design. The below grade connection will, as I said, require some further engineering work to understand it.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. Parking. The parking garage, or we heard the parking is basically the minimum requirement. It's just a sneeze above the minimum requirement. The city's population is going to increase 400,000 over the next 30 years. The population is going to age. Older adults tend to require medical service at a greater rate than younger. So would a rational person then not conclude that the demand for parking, despite very ambitious modal split shares going forward, is not going to go up, and that the parking demands may not be able to be met by the hospital on site? How are staff comfortable with the parking numbers that are being projected?
So, Chair, I'm going to ask Sean or Mike to start with this, and I may have some concluding remarks.
Mr. Chair, I can start with that. I think we have to, staff are we're very supportive of the transit oriented development opportunities of this site. And so starting off with that, the zoning does have a minimum and a maximum parking, recognizing that it's at the confluence of the Trillium line and the Carling high priority transit. So I think the starting point is that staff are very supportive to leverage those opportunities. And we don't want to get into a situation where we're providing too much parking for the what ifs of if more cars are coming. We know I've heard a lot from the community on climate emergency. The cities have invested heavily in transit, and I think this is the right decision for staff to move forward and kind of, although it's coming from TOH, but partnering them on this transportation demand management to help leverage these opportunities here. And as the site grows, we'll see other trends, and there could be other opportunities on the property. But I think for right now, I think this is the way staff are very comfortable proceeding.
And Mr. Chair, may I add just a couple of quick comments? So if we read the motion that's before committee to continue to grind down the size of the surface parking lots, and though that could be finding ways to underground the parking so that we don't lose any parking, it could come out in a different way. But if it actually arrived at a number below the minimum parking, the hospital may be back before the committee of adjustment or planning committee for relief from the zoning requirements if they go below the minimum. That's just a caution of the motion in front of you. Staff still support the motion, but you should be aware of that. The second thing is, if through the monitoring work we do through the Councillor Leaper motion shows that off-site parking becomes a bigger issue, we probably should be more permissive of the private development sites in and around the hospital that will have redevelopment rights through the Preston Carling secondary plan to go beyond their minimums of parking if they find that it's a business case to do so. We should just monitor and be aware of that. That might be part of the solution as well.
Thank you. As the local councillor, we, the community, have had a number of discussions about Fisher Avenue and whether the one lane in each direction Fisher Avenue would be widened due to local developments. The federal government and planning department have always said there is no intent to widen this street. We've heard through public delegations concerns that Prince of Wales, which is one lane going through my ward, may be widened to accommodate future traffic demand to get to and from the hospital. What is the city of Ottawa considering with respect to the roads, the arterials that serve in and around this location going forward? Can we maintain them as one lanes, both Fisher and Prince of Wales?
So chairs, Fisher and Prince of Wales serve the current hospital in its current location right now. Those roads, if you're coming from the south today, those are the two roads that are used to get to the hospital. So really, the hospital shifting and moving 1,500 meters to the east is really not going to change that dynamic. And so the hospital in and of itself moving locations does not create the preconditions that would cause us to look at that. And certainly in the official plan, we looked at the Fisher between Baseline and Carling and don't want to be widening that. That's one of the matters we're addressing in the official plan. So it really becomes about network growth, and that's what the next transportation master plan has to look at on a citywide basis, is on network growth. But lately, the city is putting more effort into investing in transit infrastructure, such as the Carling bus priority corridor, the Baseline corridor, the line 2. So it's not been the city's plan to be widening roads. That's not the choices we've been making. So I don't see a scenario in my mind where the TMP is going to be pointing that direction, but I have to let that process play out in a couple of years. But it's network growth, not hospital generated growth.
Okay, so just for the record, as I have a number of residents watching right now, as the GM of planning, you did not foresee from a hospital perspective future demand requiring the widening of Fisher or Prince of Wales.
That's correct. Mr. Jamp has looked at this, and if he can virtually kick me under the table unless I'm making a commitment on behalf of the department. But it is, the network that exists today will support the future growth of the hospital. There may be intersection modifications, minor modifications, but we're not looking at widenings because of the hospital.
All right, thank you. And my last question now for this time, Chair, is about the park. The proposed park on the 6 acre, I'm not sure if people know, it's 6 acres is the area of the garage roof, which is huge. Assuming the hospital is responsible for the design and development of the park, the green space, the amenities, no one's mentioned the tennis courts, the deal, all the work to save the tennis club. The tennis club that's on the grounds is relocating on top of the garage. No one has mentioned that yet, and they're going to be able to expand, that the club is going to be retained, which is very good news. But to staff, who looks after the park once it's built? Is this an Ottawa Hospital park they maintain in perpetuity? Does the city of Ottawa get the keys on day one, and then taxpayers are responsible for looking after this park? What is the agreement that's being considered between the hospital and the city of Ottawa?
So Chair, this is a privately operated public space in the context of the city's official plan. The hospital has responsibility for maintenance, and they are working with partners in the area who are already operating space. And I can't speak for the hospital, but they do have partners lined up, we believe, to do the maintenance for them.
So the city of Ottawa will not be responsible for this park?
That's correct. It's a privately owned public space.
Fair enough. Okay. I'm going to park my other questions for now and let my colleagues continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Menard, you're back.
Oh, it's my second time. Did you want to go to others?
I just go in the order that people put their hands up, so it's all good.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chair. I will jump right in then. We heard on Friday about the environmental impact assessment. I understand this is another order of government that would do this, but it wasn't clear to me whether or not this was going to be done for this site. So if we could just get clarity from staff, is an environmental impact assessment going to be done for the site? When is that looking to be done? Will it be before or after the parking garage is proposed to be constructed just next year?
Mr. Chair, because it's federal land, there's a federal effects determination, which does an environmental effects analysis, which I think the terminology about environmental assessment, it's more or less the same thing. So they have to do an environmental effects analysis, and through the federal regulations, they didn't have to do one for the master plan because the master plan didn't result in shovels in the ground. So they have to do one for submission of any implementing plan. So the first phase 1 implementation site plan, the applicant, the Ottawa Hospital, has to prepare this environmental effects analysis, and they're going to combine it with the city's requirements for our municipal requirements for our environmental impact statement. So there's going to be one report that covers both municipal jurisdiction and federal jurisdiction, and that will come forward as a required report that the NCC will review and that the city will review for our component, which is the environmental impact statement of that report on the first phase 1 implementation.
Okay, thank you. That's much more clear. The timing of that, I suppose, would be almost immediate, given that they anticipate the construction of the garage in 2022.
Mr. Chair, yes, I would expect that they are undertaking that now. They are looking at, the applicant is looking to submit their phase 1 in the fall. So I would anticipate that that is being done now by the applicant's consultants.
Okay, thank you. If that comes back and it finds issues or problems, I assume the city, the federal government can hold off on the construction of the parking garage if there are issues that finds, say, with water table, the effect of Dow's Lake, our heritage resources, that sort of thing. Is that the case?
So, Mr. Chair, it won't be looking at the heritage resources, but I can only speak to the municipal aspect. We've had the environmental impact statement submitted for the master plan, and there's nothing in, although we have conditions for certain aspects of that moving forward, there's nothing in the our environmental impact statement that is saying the master plan can't go forward. It's more the mitigation of certain aspects and follow up with the province on species at risk and those sorts. So from a municipal perspective, I don't anticipate anything that changes how the master plan can develop.
Okay. Yeah, because there's a lot of, this is a very interesting site, huge changes in topography, obviously the fault lines underneath, things that could really affect the potential here. So, and I saw the statement, but as we heard from a delegation, there's more required there, and that's confirmed today. So I appreciate that. One of the other delegations had raised, Chair, that the traffic study done thus far, the impact assessment did not take into consideration many other large developments north of Carling and nearby. I think by my count, thousands of units. So is that accurate? They talked about the 600-meter radius, but is that accurate? Did it not take into account all the other development that is coming along Carling? And we're talking, 45, 50-story buildings here.
Mr. Chair, I'll just lead Mr. Giampa into this so he can answer it. With the time of the application, they've accounted for all the relevant other site plan applications when they submitted, and any addendums and so forth moving forward, they have to bring in those relevant studies. But maybe Mr. Giampa can have something else to add to that.
Thank you, Sean. Mr. Chair, the 600-meter radius for surrounding developments is correct. That is according to our council approved guidelines. But we will take another look as we move into subsequent site plans to ensure that we capture any new applications, perhaps some applications that may have stalled in the past that are back online. So I haven't fact checked the claims that the associations have done, but I will, absolutely.
Okay, that would be appreciated. And if you get back to me directly, that would be very helpful. Of course, we have a motion that encourages the hospital to bring in those associations and work with them on these types of things moving forward. But having that in advance would be very helpful. Thank you for that. On the LRT, we are planning eventually for a twinning of the Dow's Lake track. So that's my understanding. It's going to happen eventually before the hospital will be built, I assume. Carling is also set for a major redo. All of Carling Avenue will be torn up and completely redone in that section of Carling and right up to Bronson. So I'm just wondering, timing for both of those aspects, but the twinning in particular, when that's slated to happen.
So, Chair, discussed this with Mr. Morgan at length. And so the twinning of the tracks underneath Dow's Lake is not the first step for expanded transit capacity on Line 2. There are significant improvements that can happen without twinning the tracks on lay-by tracks around stations, signal changes, and other things. I'm not an expert on rail operations. I'm not going to pretend to be, but there are many steps we can do before the actual drilling of a second or widened tunnel underneath Dow's Lake and the widening of the trench at this location, which it's tied to. So it could be as many as 20 years before we actually need to widen that area. What we're working on negotiating with the hospital right now is to do engineering and perhaps pre-excavation of certain elements, so we minimize disruptions on the hospital's operations when they construct that. When we ultimately get to that point, it'll simplify it. But we're definitely protecting for the corridor, and there's nothing that's being built that would impede or preclude that.
Okay, thank you for that. I think the opportunity to potentially go underground if we are tearing it up at a similar time would be high, and I say that because there's a lot of potential benefit from going underground, from what I've read in several aspects from Prince of Wales as well. The protection from inclement weather, the time that it takes. It's a quick shot. You think about the Carlton tunnel system. The current intersections in that area, which are not great for pedestrians, cyclists, people in wheelchairs. So I hope that is considered when Carling is redone.
Chair, if I may, I urge council not to get stuck on one versus the other. I think a full review of both options should be done. The benefit of a bridge, for example, is that it could be configured so it's not just transit users. It could be people on Carling Avenue who want to get from one side to the other would be able to use it. There are maybe ease of implementation issues. And if it's a fully covered bridge like we're doing in many other locations in the city, it can equally be weather protected and can have some lovely views. But I also agree that the tunnel also has advantages, but I just urge council not to preclude either option at this stage. We urge you as a department to leave both options on the table.
Appreciate that, and certainly have that in my mind now. Thank you for that, Mr. Willis. I thank you for doing both options. That's going to be helpful in terms of reviewing both. The other one I wanted to just mention is around a shuttle service. There had been talk of potential for, because of the length of distance from Carling to the main entrance, of a shuttle service potentially from the garage or the front. Now, if we're bringing transit in, there may be less of a need, but there may still be a need there. Has that been discussed? I know we've talked about platforms that may move as well. Just to get your opinion on that.
So Ms. Conley may have a point to make, but I think the motion that's before us to look at transit into the site, one can liberally interpret to look at both OC Transpo service and perhaps service the hospital may provide. Hospital runs a major shuttle service already between its multiple campuses of the general and the Riverside, and there may be a role for it to play in this as well. I would take the motion direction as a package deal, looking at OC Transpo and hospital services in that, and we will go back and look at that with them as we develop the next stage of the site plan.
Okay, thank you for that. Thanks for that answer. That's really helpful. One of the things that I wanted to raise is around transit passes as well. A lot of hospital staff here, a lot of people going back and forth every single day. There's been a suggestion that we work on either a UPass type of pass for this service or free transit options for people that are at the hospital site, where the hospital is providing that as well, to get them to take transit, right? We're going to need people to switch over. This site will not work without the modal share targets we're talking about here. So we need people to do that. Is that within the realm of possibility? The UPass, the low or free cost transit options to induce that switch that we need to take place?
So Chair, Mr. Manconi and I had meetings with the hospital executives and discussed the option of a UPass type option. I mean, free transit is not within the scope of what staff can discuss. The Transit Commission will have to address that. But certainly any major employer in the city who has that many employees coming to a site, we would entertain discussions with them at any time as part of a travel demand management strategy, this type of option. And there is actually a condition of approval for a travel demand management strategy. So there is a venue for that conversation to continue to happen. And we think there is some merit in a UPass type arrangement. And we intend to have that conversation with the hospital.
Okay, thank you for that. Bike Ottawa has raised some interesting things in their delegation and the material submitted to us. And Chair, this will be my last point before I hand it back to you. They've talked about the convertibility of parking spaces within the garage to things like electric car share and bike parking spots, and the inducement of cargo bikes and other options. I assume that is all on the table and will be considered by staff as we move ahead. Obviously, that site plan would be coming next for the garage itself, as I understand it, fairly quickly. So would that be part of those discussions when that arises?
Chair, we certainly will look at that. Those were great suggestions from Bike Ottawa, and I think we're happy to explore them as we go further. Chair, as I indicated earlier, I apologize. I have to step out for a few minutes, but I will be back. The meeting staff can continue. And if any questions need to be directed to me personally, I will be back to answer them. And I apologize to council for that.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr. Chair, could I just wanted to follow up with Councillor Menard. It's one of his questions, just because there's a slight nuance versus environmental assessment and the requirement for the effects analysis. So usually the environmental assessment looks at alternatives. So in this case, they would be doing environmental effects analysis, which I don't believe is looking at alternatives. So there's just a nuance between the two when you call the two studies, and I think a lot of, common term people say is environmental assessment, but that's a small nuance I just wanted to point out.
Okay, I appreciate that. And just as a last comment for me, Chair, another question. Are you going to go to comments after the questions, or you want it all now?
No, people can wrap up at the end if they want.
Okay, thank you. I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McKenney.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to staff and my colleagues for the questions and answers today. I'm not going to go over what's already been discussed. I obviously share the same concerns in terms of site plan here. We have an area in the city that is, right now adds some green space, certainly adds, over 600 trees. And it's not, we're not talking about whether we should put a hospital here or not. That's not part of our discussion. Our discussion is what is happening on this site and how does it, how do we ensure that the end result will get people there safely, will ensure that people are able to take transit, including bus, to the door. A good LRT connection so that we don't have the traffic impacts that will follow, and of course, the issue of an above ground surface parkade, the loss of trees, the surface parking are just issues that for me as the neighboring councillor of the neighboring ward. I just don't see that we've done the work that we've insisted that the hospital's done the work to mitigate what will really, if this hospital goes in as is, really will not work for the surrounding community, but will just not work for a city that wants to move forward and be a greener and more thoughtful city in terms of climate change and all of the aspects that are required to make sure that we get there. Again, I'm not gonna repeat the questions, but I do want to ask a few around the green space that is proposed for the top of the parkade. I know we have something similar over on the War Museum that I don't think I've ever seen more than one or two people on top of. It's very hot. There's, it just doesn't lend itself much to a park space. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that this one works, that you're able to plant bigger bushes. You can't plant a tree up there, but maybe a bit bigger bushes, and there is some green space. What does that look like in terms of public access? And what does that look like in terms of public ownership? Will this green space be publicly owned and operated, or will it be a privately owned public space?
Mr. Chair, it will be privately owned. The conditions of master plan approval require easements in the favor of the public in the city to access all the pedestrian routes to the top of the garage and the open space and the open space itself. So it will be legally publicly accessible, but not publicly maintained. And I don't know if you need a visual, if you did want to discuss a visual, I could just ask the committee coordinator. In my presentation, the last slide has a visual of the garage if we needed to get into any more details about the access up. I mean, one of the things that staff and the NCC pushed hard on is we don't want a utilitarian access up there. We don't want just an access that has no experience. So we worked hard on the Preston side to have a ramp, accessible ramp system that not only gets to the top of the garage, but would feel more like an experience of itself as well, going to the top of the garage through the vegetation planted. So we thought that was really important to make it an experience and not a utilitarian access. So the image on your on the bottom right is the elevation of Preston Street. And if you see, there's points where you can see images of people standing or walking, but that's the cross section of the ramp and with the landscape in between. So, and then there's a couple of belvederes or lookout points, resting places. So I think that teasing out the details of that as well through more NCC design review and city design review, making sure that that experience is what gets built. It was important.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And seeing the cross section, I guess also my concern with publicly owned privately owned public space, POPs, as we like to call them, is that at some point something goes wrong and the entity owning, whether it's a developer or in this case the hospital, shuts down parts of it. And we've seen that happen. It's happened across the city. We've fenced off privately owned public space. We've gated it. We've made sure that, you know, if there are people using it who, you know, in a way that doesn't, you know, in a way that isn't consistent with what perhaps the hospital envisions today, i.e. maybe people sleeping on a bench because they have nowhere else to sleep, you know, POPs really is not public space. So I think that we have to really, I want to just be really very clear that when we're saying yes to site plan here, or if you are, I don't have a vote today, I'm not on the committee, but it is privately owned space that can, easements can change and access to public use can change. On trees, and thank you to Councillor Leeper for bringing forward a motion on my behalf around upfront tree planting. The ward, again, that I represent next door, we have very few trees. Our spring planting tree program next spring, we're getting 20. I think Councillor Brockington's getting some 1,700 or something, but we're getting 20. So we get trees cut down weekly. I just got another notice that 2 more are coming down in the ward, and we're not replacing them. And there might be a plan in the future, but today we're not replacing trees. So the fact that you know, we're taking down what's now 500 trees as opposed to 600 makes me question how hard we pushed. If they could go from over 600 and remove 100 from that plan. Did we push hard enough to ensure that they aren't taking down any more trees than that is required, and B, you know, will there be like a serious effort to plant trees in advance of the hospital completion? We can't wait in the downtown to replant 500 trees, 1,000 trees. It's critical that these trees get replaced, and they get replaced as quickly as possible. So just want to hear from staff on what the plan would be for replacing these trees and ensuring that the hospital does everything they can to replace the tree loss in advance of them moving towards the 40% canopy cover.
Mr. Chair, I'll bring in Martha Copestake as well on this. I just wanted to also use your question on trees to let committee members know that also we're conditioning a vegetation management and conservation strategy. So to an earlier question about how do we make sure offsite trees survive and what's our review period on those and so forth. The hospital, it has to create this management strategy that will come forward as well on how they're managing their environmental assets there. So I'm going to bring in, I'll ask Martha to answer your question you raised.
Hi, thanks a lot. So like Sean's talked about several times through this, we're going to be looking at everything in much more detail at a site plan specific level. So first I'm going to address the tree retention aspect of it. And basically once we start getting the tree conservation report is going to be redone or done in a detailed way for each site plan. So much more detailed than what we have right now, because we'll have the servicing and the engineering and all of that information at the time of the site plan and in good level of detail. And that's when we're going to be able to really drill in and look at what is being proposed to be removed and where there are possibilities for retention. So that's when the sort of the realness of the situation hits the ground. And that's when we can start to make efforts to make little changes here and there so that we can preserve as much as possible, which is what we do on all of the site plans that come through. So my colleague, Mark Richardson, who looks at site plans and plans of subdivision, he'll be taking that same sort of approach here. And, I'll be working with him, and forestry will be working with him, having like a real lens on that tree retention aspect. So just so you know, to assure you, that's when we're going to get into that level of detail. We can't even get into that level of detail right now because we just don't have that detailed information to understand what the possible impacts are. And we'll be looking to use all the mitigation tools that we're aware of and that the consultants and stuff are aware of as well to come up with creative design ideas so that we can retain as many trees as possible here. So that's that. With respect to the tree planting, same kind of thing. We're going to have to look at really be focused in on the phasing and like how the phasing is going to work and where they're going to be, how they're essentially like their construction movement is going to be to determine exactly how we can lay out the landscaping as we go through the phasing. But my intention and my expectation would be that we're working to get as much as the landscaping done at the time as possible as we move things forward. But we also want to make sure that we're not setting up, and I know, there's examples in your ward of situations where we've planted something on an interim basis and then we let it, mature and people get attached to it. And then it turns out they have to come down. We really don't want to set ourselves up for those kinds of situations. So we want to be ultra realistic about what's happening there. Look forward to working on the motion that we talked about with respect to finding places where we can do that early tree planting.
No, I appreciate that. Thanks, Martha. Just one last question then. There's also a motion we're directing staff to look at a reduction in surface parking, which is quite outrageous really on this site. And how does that tie in then to both tree retention, the possibility of retaining more trees and or planting more trees? If we have less surface parking, we obviously have more space for green space, for trees, for all of the things that make this actually a healthy environment in and around the hospital.
Mr. Chair, that's a good point. I think looking when each subsequent phase comes forward, and we can take that lens and see, if there was a surface area where a couple trees had to be removed for that surface area, well, we'd take that opportunity to see what trees can be retained within a parking lot, or what opportunities there are to replace surface parking with more appropriate landscaping. And then just the lens of the zoning bylaw, making sure that the applicant as well is meeting the minimum parking through the zoning. But I think it just gives us that opportunity to look further into how to retain, where can we retain trees and where can we put more in lieu of hard surface parking spaces.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I just want to repeat, just to be on record, that we have to look at less surface parking. We have to look at more green space, more trees. We had many delegates come speak to us on Friday. Many of them talked about, they all talked about the same thing really, whether they thought they were, whether they were, pro site plan and wanted the hospital to go ahead, which we all want the hospital. I don't think that's a question. But people were also very concerned about what we were doing to the environment, to the natural environment in this area. And really, I think that, when we think about, we're building a hospital, we're building a healthcare center, that world class is what we're calling it. And we need the surrounding environment to be as healthy. We need people to experience, to have, clean air, good oxygen, shade, all the things that contribute to good health in and around the hospital. So I look forward to those ongoing conversations. Obviously, come council won't be able to support site plan as is, because I just don't think that we've gone far enough or pushed the hospital to go far enough in their planning. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington.
Thanks, Chair. And Councillor McKinney, just before you go, I'm not sure if you came in late, but there was a direction to staff I gave that would monitor the new trees that get planted to ensure that if any don't make it, we continue to maintain a 2,500 new tree, a net 2,500, because sometimes we plant trees, they die, nothing happens. So Mr. Willis accepts some direction in that regard. And Mr. Moore, what is the number of trees? The number keeps changing, but the number of trees that right now is targeted for removal is?
Mr. Chair, and maybe Martha could correct me, I think it's 523 for removal, and I think there's 550 to be retained above 10 centimeters at at breast height, 10 centimeters diameter.
And are any of the trees that are slated for to be cut down, can they not be replanted elsewhere? I know that is a more laborious task, but I've seen it with my own eyes. Very large trees removed, taken somewhere else to be planted. Have we considered that instead of killing trees? Is there a way to relocate them?
Mr. Chair, I know we've looked at the old cedar hedge collection, and the hospital team is looking at that to see where opportunities are for relocation. That's the extent of where we've looked at that. Otherwise, I don't know if Martha's team has any experience with the tree spade that would have to come in, the size and the cost to relocate a significant tree. I don't have a touch point on how much that costs and so forth, but they definitely have looked at the old cedar hedge collection and are trying to look at what they can do with that, or portions of it.
Maybe I can add to that, Sean. There has been some discussion, and again, the details will come at the phase level when we see the tree conservation report, but there's been some discussion around trying to do transplanting where possible. Of course, when transplanting a tree, we can't move very large trees. We can move up to about 20, maybe towards 30 centimeters, but that starts to get very large. And so there's definitely been discussion at the table about that, and we will look for those opportunities. One of the challenges becomes having a place to put it, like having it happen at the right time, like just the scheduling of it all, that it's happening at the right season, at the right time, there's a place to put it right away. But we have been able to do that. Like I've been involved in files where we've done that and it's been successful over the years. So we'll definitely look into those opportunities, but it's not the kind of thing where we can take, any of these 40, 50, 60 very big trees and be moving them around. They wouldn't survive, and the equipment just doesn't exist to do that kind of work. But it's a good idea.
As we go through the specific site plans, how likely is it we can retain more trees? You have 525 slated for removal. Is there any likelihood that we can save some of those?
Well, just as I said in the last answer, that's the kind of thing that we're going to be looking at and focusing on when we get there. So I can't really speak to the likelihood of it, but that's what we'll be aiming to do. And like I said, looking at what kind of mitigation measures we can put in place. If there's like a pathway near it or something, what kind of materials, how can we dig that? How do we, looking at all of those kinds of things, that's where we get into the details of it. So My hope is that we're able to do that, but we'll have to see what the engineering and the servicing and all that looks like in order to determine it.
And Mr. Chair, the other thing that is an ally with us is the cultural heritage impact statement and the conditions that we've imposed on the master plan with respect to that, because one aspect is maintaining that pastoral image into the farm. So trees along the boundary of the site with Maple Drive coming into the farm are something that staff and heritage staff are looking at to be retained. So we look at it as we have another study for another aspect where we need to look at retaining trees. So that's another kind of ally in our goal to maintain as many boundary trees with the farm as possible.
Thank you. There was a comment about trees in my ward where we still haven't touched trees that came down from the tornado 3 years later. So yes, we're getting a number of trees this fall, but tornado and emerald ash borer have wreaked havoc. Can staff just give us the vision for Carling Avenue as far as transit goes? We've talked about converting the right travel lanes to a bus rapid system. We're looking at some sort of modified light rail system on Carling Avenue. What are the timelines for this work to get done? There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of talk about Carling Avenue, but people don't know timelines for various work.
Mr. Chair, the timelines are, so the Transportation Master Plan shows one median lane between Bayswater and Bronson with a segregated bus service. That project, I believe, is slated for about 2026. I think it's been pushed off. I think it was earlier, but now 2026. The Transportation Master Plan, as you mentioned, speaks to the median lane all the way from the hospital site to Lincoln Fields. But that is, it's not funded yet. And that's a project, I think in our TMP, Transportation Master Plan, is post 2031.
And those are the two main ones. Two main projects. Okay. We talked about the transit connection from the station to the hospital, underground tunnel, above ground bridge. If we remember the Bayshore Shopping Mall, I think last year there were some towers right to the west of Bayshore Mall that were built. They're going to have, if memory serves me correctly, an above ground tunnel that connects the apartment buildings to a station. There's a lot of development that's already been approved on the north side of Carling in the vicinity of the Dow's Lake Station. And one of them is going to be Ottawa's tallest skyscraper, taller than the one that's built now. Can staff or will staff consider opportunities to connect these buildings with either the station tunnel or a separate tunnel to the hospital? Does that get factored in when you look at site plan for buildings like this? If we're going to have very large towers directly across the street, maybe a critical mass of people who may be working or maybe even patients, is there a way to connect these buildings as well with either the station and then they can get across or to the hospital? Will that be considered?
Mr. Chair, I believe there's certainly opportunities for buildings that are abutting the station to have connectivity through the individual site plan control applications for those towers. I'm not privy to those applications next to the station and what dialogues we've had with the developers. But I recall the application you're speaking about at Bayshore, where there is a direct overhead pedestrian connection in. So the answer, yes, that would be something that staff look at and see if that's attainable, feasible, if it can connect to the station and how. Yeah.
Okay. And Chair, in Mr. Willis's absence, I have a question about tourism. Is there anyone here that can take that question?
Oops. Mr. Chair, Mr. Brock, Mr. Chair, did you want to ask that question and we can see who can field it?
Yeah, I mean, Chair, I heard a number of delegates imply that building a hospital at this location will somehow impact tourism. that either the proximity to the canal, which many reference as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the site is in the proximity of course, Winterlude and the Tulip Festival. I just want to say I wrote to Michael Crockett on Friday, the head of Ottawa Tourism, and I said, what do you think about this? He said no one had approached him to ask. There's no data that he's aware of that would prove this to be true. And he thinks that this hospital might actually do the opposite, and that is bring in conventions and business, there'd be a net impact, positive impact from a tourism perspective. I just wanted to ask city staff if they had any information in this regard.
Chair, in Mr. Willis' absence, I'll ask Ms. Collins to respond from the heritage perspective, because the tourism and heritage review are closely related.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lily. Excuse me. Yes, Mr. Chair. I mean, I think at this point we haven't received any comments from Parks Canada or the NCC or other tourism people involved in the canal, including the World Heritage Center, that would indicate to us that there is any concern about the impacts of the proposed hospital on tourism-related aspects of the Rideau Canal, its buffer, Winterlude, or any of the associated cultural heritage landscape. As mentioned in the staff presentation on Friday, the hospital is located well outside of the canal, the Rideau Canal World Heritage Site and its visual buffer. And while there will be some minimal visual impacts beyond the previously existing Sir John Carling building, staff aren't particularly concerned that it will have a negative impact on the experience of the World Heritage Site.
All right, I appreciate that that comment. And Mr. Chair, that's all from myself. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So just gonna ask a couple quick questions, and then we'll go, people can prepare and go into your final comments that you might want to make. Obviously, I'll defer to Councillor Brockton going last, being the hospital resides in River Ward. Just quickly on, we've heard a lot about surface parking. I just want to touch on a couple things. So the site plan currently, the surface parking that we have, the lot to the north, it's just adjacent to the existing cafeteria building. That's already there, correct? That's an existing surface parking lot.
Mr.
Right?
Chair, that's correct. In the northwest quadrant, yes,
Yep.
there's a surface.
Yeah, next to the observatory.
Correct.
And then the two lots that are proposed, one at the back of the hospital, I believe that's on top of the heating and cooling plant.
Correct, Mr. Chair. It's combined with the main utility plant for the building.
Okay. And then the third major lot. Now, I'm not going to talk, there's obviously the trucking access off of Prince of Wales. I believe that's being built where the previous Sir John Carling parking lot was. But as you go into the I would say the parking lot that's built on sort of currently unused land. I think if even historically the land was never used for anything. That's where the site plan calls for the future the future Heart Institute. So that surface parking lot, I guess, would be a placeholder for what is to be the future Heart Institute. If they move over there in 20, 30 years, obviously they have a fairly new facility where they're at right now. Do you know what how that plan works into place? Obviously, we have a requirement for parking. When the Heart Institute moves over here, they'll take over what is this temporary parking lot. How does that work out? Obviously, they'll have to do a whole site plan for that too. But that surface parking lot becomes what at that point? I mean, it becomes Heart Institute, but where's the parking for the Heart Institute go then?
So, Mr. Chair, at that point, they would have to demonstrate how their overall master plan complies with the minimum parking rates, and how they achieve that is, I guess, they could look at if they're doing a level underground, or if they had parking in a structured format there somehow, or if they're able to provide the Heart Institute without additional parking through other means on the site. But that's something that would come forward. They're projecting at about 2045 as a Heart Institute relocating to this location.
And they're not proposing to plant any trees in the meantime in that space so that we just lose those trees in 20, 25 years time, right?
So, Mr. Chair, we've looked at a number of things in terms of not cutting trees down until we get to that point of the Heart Institute coming over. So we're not cutting trees down for when they could be there for 20 years. And we want to be cognizant of not planting trees as per the motion that's on the table, knowing that could be an area of development. So we need to look at where areas will be preserved, where we can do the tree planting so that they don't get cut down in the future.
Okay, thanks. All right, thanks for that. I don't have any other specific questions. So who would like to wrap up? I know Councillor Menard said he wanted to have some comments toward the end. I know Councillor Brockington obviously will want to. Anyone else? I know Councillor Leeper sort of said his piece at his time, so I think he might be okay. So we'll go ahead to Councillor Menard then.
Okay, thanks, Chair. And we're going to be doing those motions after the wrap-up piece.
Well, actually, good point. You know what? I'll do those motions right now.
Okay.
Let me bring my screen up that has those listed on them. All right, so we will go reintroduce and we'll vote on those motions right now. So the first motion that came forward was Councillor Brockington, and it's the letter to federal ministers requesting a new secondary plan or a master plan, I guess, for the experimental farm. So obviously you read it in its entirety. If you want to just cue it up really quickly, Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, certainly over the last 7 years since I was elected, after John Baird made his announcement, the concern in the public about the experimental farm has been significant. We've certainly heard from the public their love for the farm and the history and heritage of it. And what is surprising to many is a historic designation does not provide any protection at all. The farm is not protected from development. The farm is not protected from the federal government making decisions going forward. In fact, under Harper, there were murmurs that the research piece could be moved elsewhere to rural components in Ottawa or across Canada. That there's nothing that keeps or retains the farm on the site in the center and the heart of Ottawa. And that's very troubling. It's troubling to me and it's troubling to the people of Ottawa. So working with a number of federal elected reps over the years, trying to get some traction and movement, we need legislation. And it was certainly the late Paul Doerr who suggested that legislation similar to what protects Gatineau Park should be in order here. Mr. Chair, we heard from members of the public, we've heard from our own staff that their support for this. This just asked the mayor to write to the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, the local member, the member-elect for Ottawa Centre, and the chair of the NCC board to introduce federal legislation to ensure long-term protection of the farm and develop a new master plan for the farm, which would seek local input and the input of expert scientists. So I think it's fairly self-explanatory. We need this. The farm is not protected and we need this. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I don't think I need to do yeas and nays on any of these motions, to be honest with you. We're not dealing with an adversarial partner here. We're dealing with someone that's a group, and we heard it. Joanne Reid was quite clear on Friday that they do support these motions and they want to work with the community. So on that motion, is that carried?
Carried.
Thank you. So next, I know my agenda here flips around back and forth between Councillor Leeper and Councillor Menard, but I'm just going to go 3 and 3. So Councillor Leeper, you have a motion requiring the traffic study.
Yeah, and you heard me this morning as we went through it with staff. The hospital has said they would agree with this. I've asked staff this morning, they've said they support it. And you've heard the implications of passing this motion, which is a relatively deep, rich, and broad study with foresight to implementing recommendations that come out of the study. So I hope colleagues can find a way to support that.
All right, thank you. So yes, you did hear Councillor Leeper speak to this morning with staff. Of course, it was introduced on Friday. So on this motion, can we carry this motion?
Carried.
Carried.
Thank you. Councillor Leeper's second motion is regarding the Trillium Path.
That's bringing the Trillium Path to the front door.
That's yes.
Yes. So you've heard a lot of discussion as well, colleagues, about the site plan infrastructure. I do believe that staff, the hospital, residents, bike advocacy groups all want to get this right. And this motion is just explicitly asking them to make sure that we have that bike access to the front door.
All right, so that's a motion in front of you. The plan committee directs staff to work with the hospital on linking the proposed cycling facility through the internal road network of the site, separated safely from the main road to the main entrance to the hospital building. On that motion, is that carried?
Carried.
Thank you. And then the third motion moved by Councillor Leeper is actually on behalf of Councillor McKenney, and it's on tree planting and the compensation. So I will actually ask Councillor McKenney to speak to that and sort of intro that for us.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's much of what my questioning had to related to, but it essentially just asked staff to, work with the hospital to find ways of planting trees and area and spaces where trees can be planted, outside of the development of the hospital, in advance rather of the development of the hospital, so that as we're losing trees, we're trying to replace them as efficiently and effectively and as quickly as possible. Obviously, we don't want, as our staff, Martha pointed out, we don't want to plant trees and then have them come down, but there are opportunities in this general vicinity to plant trees ahead of time so that we are able to reach the 40% tree canopy in the future.
All right, thank you. So the motion from the committee then is that planning committee directs staff to work with the Ottawa Hospital to identify tree planting areas that can be planted outside of any impacts of future development phases, thus allowing significant upfront tree planting compensation to occur on the site. Is that motion carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Thank you. And now we move to Councillor Menard. His first motion is regarding transit into the site.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yes, as committee will know, transit currently does not penetrate into the site. We have a motion in front of us that would make sure that the road access that's built could allow for transit into the site, as well as asking staff to work with the Ottawa Hospital on that possibility in the future. Whether that be shuttle buses or actual OC Transpo buses that come in right to the main entrance. That's the intent of the motion. So I hope folks can support this today.
All right, thank you. So again, the motion in front of us is that planning committee directs staff to ensure that the proposed internal road network is capable of accommodating local transit services from a road design perspective, and also to assess as part of the transit service plan for the hospital whether local transit services should utilize these local roads and enter into the site to complement the other transit facilities surrounding the site. So on that motion, is that carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Thank you. Our next motion regarding surface parking, and of course we talked about this morning as well. So Councillor Menard, go ahead.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, this motion is asking staff to, when the implementing site plans come along, to do whatever possible to ensure that we're being as efficient as possible on the site, to not lose space for trees and green space, either by putting parking underground or reducing the amount of surface parking that is needed, which is one of the most inefficient forms of parking. So I hope we've had a lot of discussion about this in the committee. I hope the committee can support this as well.
Thanks. So this one here, that planning committee directs staff to work with the Ottawa Hospital on substantially reducing the amount of surface parking around the site during future implementing site plan control applications. On that item, is it carried?
Carried.
Thank you. And the final motion that was introduced, obviously there's still the direction on lighting, but the final motion that was introduced on Friday from Councillor Menard regarding the community community, community association involvement.
Thanks very much, Chair. So members will know that the hospital is being tasked with the enabling transportation network as we move along in terms of how parking is going to work off-site, where people are coming from. This motion would set up a transportation advisory group. It would ask ward councillors to ensure that they're putting forward names from each community. This is likely the greatest effect for our local communities is transportation, traffic, modal share. And so this is setting that up and encouraging the hospital to utilize this group and the city in coordinating with them so that our local community associations can be involved, and really will speak to a lot of what Councillor Leeper's motion previously passed is trying to do as well. Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. So that planning committee directs staff to work with the Ottawa Hospital and encouraging them to set up a community transportation advisory group and ask adjacent ward councillors to recommend community representatives to inform the required neighborhood traffic calming study and offsite parking. So is that item carried?
Carried.
Thank you. And then you just want to, obviously we had a discussion on Friday regarding the observatory and the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. And I believe you have a direction with that regard.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. That planning committee directs staff to review site lighting for the future implementing site plan for the main hospital building. The site lighting shall be in accordance with council approved lighting conditions that include designing with only fixtures that meet the criteria for full cutoff or sharp cutoff classification as recognized by the Illuminating Engineering Society of North America, and meeting minimal light spillage onto adjacent properties. Planning committee further directs staff to ensure that potential impacts of the site lighting on the Dominion Observatory complex are considered through addendums to the Cultural Heritage Impact Statement, with consideration of guidelines prepared by the International Dark Sky Association and with direct open communication with the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada.
Thank you. So we heard, again, we heard conversation with this on Friday. We heard Graham Bird also reference this as well through questions from members of committee. So just to confirm, do staff take this astronomical direction?
Mr. Chair, confirm we support this.
All right. Thank you so much. So that is it for the motions and directions. So we will go back, and I had Councillor Menard was first, followed by Councillor Gower.
Thank you very much, Chair. I know that around this table, we're all in favor of a new, innovative, and advanced hospital. We do need one. But we're at a point where this site selection was done, of course, in what I consider to be a very undemocratic way, behind closed doors with no minutes, no delegations. And I think that was a big mistake. And now we are where we are. We're here, and we're not debating that. We're debating the site plan, the master site plan. But knowing that, I, along with other local councillors, have had a role to play of doing everything we can. There's 4 local councillors here, Chair. I'm actually the ward councillor for a portion of this site. Councillor Brocken is for the rest of the site, and 2 other ward councillors, Councillor McKenney and Councillor Leeper, who are right next door. So very affected by this. And we're all in a position where we're doing everything we can to improve the site, while some of us also expressing concerns, which is why you see the amending motions in front of you. For me personally, there may have been a path that could have done, enough to ameliorate this on the site plan to be able to feel comfortable lifting for myself the whole condition, but the major issues remain. We can't bury the parking because of the underground issues and the site issues, and we won't make the investment necessary to do so. Even though there was a promise and fulfillment that was necessary to do so, we did see that promise be made, and that has gone unfulfilled. We should be locating these buildings close to the main access street for accessibility reasons and for access to our multi-billion-dollar transit system, and that is not happening. And it's a feature that we should have courage to ask for and ask the applicant to do, which is why I say, let's not lift the hold. Let's go back to them and ask them to make that change so that we can get a better application. We should not locate parking areas between the street and the building entrances, something else that's been talked about in our transportation demand management. We are losing precious, declining, open, and beautiful green space in our central core that you can never get back. And shifting the site plan could have really made a difference in a lot of that preservation. But we're not doing that with this site plan. And we're also not meeting, and this is probably most important, Chair, is we're not actually meeting the criteria that council originally approved in June of 2018 in order to lift this hold for the master site plan and the policy that came along with it. We're not actually meeting those criteria to make that lift. And I went through those early on in the meeting. So if we've been able to follow through on those aspects, I could have been in favor overall. But I'm in a position now, of course, to vote for the amending motions, which I appreciate this committee doing. Thank you for passing those and working with us in that way. While I'll be voting against the lifting of the actual hold condition until we can get this right. I think we can get a better plan in front of us that addresses those issues that I've mentioned. So thanks, Chair. Back to you.
Thank you. I think it was important to note too that we do have those second opportunities when it comes to the site plan and stuff to be able to look at those things. It isn't all for naught today. You will have more time to be able to work on these concerns that you have, and as you mentioned in your comments. So thank you, Councillor Gower.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to provide maybe a bit of a contrasting point of view, reflecting on what we've heard over the last 12 hours or so of this meeting and a lot of the emails and correspondence we've had. I think this master plan is pretty good by any measure. It's very good. I think it's thoughtful in terms of the clinical needs of the hospital. I think it's responsive to a lot of the concerns that have been raised by residents, by stakeholders, and by councillors. And as you've just pointed out, Chair, it is very early in the process. It's a master plan, and there's still work to be done. I think the directions and motions, I think there's 8 in total that have been brought forward by different members of our committee and councillors, give really good direction to refine some of the elements that continue to cause concern from the community. I was really interested in the comments from the applicant in terms of how they came up with this design that's in front of us. The first criteria is clinical need. The second is efficiency in operations. And the third is around access for both the public and for the back of house, some of the technical requirements that they have for operations and ambulances and so on. I think it's worth also noting some of the achievements that staff have made in refining this master plan. So through work with residents, councillors, stakeholders, the hospital, the public realm at Carling and Preston, the additional screening of the parkade, the 40% tree canopy, some of the improvements to cycling, and then the ability to accommodate future transit. These are all pretty significant changes that have happened over the past few months to refine this plan. The underground parking garage would be, sure, nice to have, but given the costs and the construction impact, if I can give you an idea of what blasting comprises and the impact that has on the public, here in Stittsville, there's a trunk sewer that's being constructed, and there's been blasting, about 10 or 12 blasts a day for the past 6 months. Our office receives endless phone calls and emails from residents who are impacted by this blasting. Even if you put aside the cost of it, I think the construction impact from the blasts and from the trucks from the site is something that I don't think residents in the area perhaps fully realize what impact that has. So I think given the cost and the impact of construction, the hospital's come up with a reasonable compromise there. And on transit as well, I mean, yes, it'd be nice to have the buildings closer to transit, but we heard from the applicant that there's also concerns about proximity to the LRT tracks. And I think the distance between the LRT station, where it is now, and the front door is considerably less than the distance from a lot of public institutions to current LRT. Even the walk from City Hall right now to the nearest transit station is further than the walk would be to the front door of the hospital. But hopefully there's room for improvement of transit on Carling and the access from the station. So anyhow, I'll be supporting this. Happy to see the directions and motions from councillors. And We'll have a lot of refinement to go over the next 20 or 25 years with each of the future phases as they come through committee. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I noticed Councillor McKenney turned their camera off when you started going a bit blasting. Don't get Councillor McKenney going a bit blasting. I said, if it's not that, it's an army of leaf blowing yellow vest folks running down the street. So there's always something going on in Somerset Ward.
If anything we know, it's construction impacts. I'm quite well aware of them.
So I'm not sure if anyone else has anything to say before I go to Councillor Brockington. I will just say one of the themes. I mean, obviously we're talking about site plan, and we've heard of other hospitals and whatnot. And there's, I've never been involved in obviously I've grown up in this city, and we have hospitals that have been where they are for the length of time I've been alive. But this is the first time I've ever kind of dove into a new hospital location discussion. It's fascinating when you look at other cities and find that they've all had these same conversations that we heard on Friday. Even just the one that Councillor Menard references in his comments, the University Health Centre in Montreal. A lot of political back and forth on that in the early 2000s between Pauline Marois and Jean Charest. It's a whole story there too. But the site plan we have in front of us, we heard comments about the size of it. 50 acres. The existing site's 23 acres. The University Health Centre in Montreal is 10 acres. And what does the University of Health Centre in Montreal have in common with the existing civic site? Really a lack of green space. It's a concrete jungle. And in the last few months, in the last year and a half, I think what's become more and more at the forefront is not just the mental health of our residents and patients and whatnot, but it's also of our healthcare workers. And what you're seeing more recently, there's a proposed development, West Park Healthcare Center in North York. You've got the Calgary Cancer Center. You have some revisions to the St. Joseph's Health Center in London, is they've all started to incorporate green space into their healthcare campuses. They're all looking at that from a different perspective. It's not just the built form. It's not just the utility space inside a hospital, but also the outside space and what that means, not just for a health and wellness center for patients, but also for staff and for the people that work there. The burnout rate amongst healthcare workers right now is severe. The mental health impact is severe. I know just recently a CHIO nurse took her own life. She was only in her early 30s. This is a realistic thing that we're going through, and I'll never be able to properly explain what it's like to live with a critical care nurse and the stuff that I hear and the stuff that impacts that life and the life of others around it. So I think when we look at designing these campuses in the future, I think the reality is that green space elements matter, and the environment that you work in matters in this type of facility. And people say we just hire more nurses. A 4-year nursing program involved a full year clinical, which she couldn't do clinical during COVID. Not only is the person I live with a critical care nurse, they also are a professor for University of Ottawa Algonquin College and St. Lawrence College, and they teach clinical nursing at CHIO. So they couldn't do that the same way they always could. So it's not exactly easy to just go out there and hire more nurses. But also, what environment are you bringing them into? And I think with this campus design, yes, it's on a large space. Yes, it has, it could be smaller. You could build it smaller, but is that better? Is it better? I don't think so. And I think that those are things that we can't necessarily quantify ourselves. But I think it's something to consider when you're looking at a site plan of this nature, and why is it this size, and why is there green space elements on it? And I think part of it is because of what service it provides. This isn't a high-tech building in Canada North. This is a major trauma center with a huge staff component, and a lot that the people that will work in this building and go with this building as patients will go through. So I think it's important that the design is the way it is. I think it's important that it embeds green space elements into it. And I think the motions that we have today to ensure that green space remains relevant to it and remains there. Councillor McKenney speaking to ensuring that the trees that get planted stay there. Councillor Brockton speaking to the same thing These are important pieces because I think it's, even to Councillor Leaper's concern, the top of that garage ends up being the space that they envision it to be. That's not just important for the city, that's important for the people that will work at this facility as well. It's important to the hospital. So I look at the site plan, I support it for for those reasons that I mentioned here, that I think the design of a modern healthcare facility matters. And I think it needs to be more than just buildings and concrete and asphalt. So thank you. And I'll go now to Councillor Brockington for final words on this.
Thank you, Chair, for your words. And thank you to all colleagues for your perseverance over these long meetings, but also your comments. I've listened to everyone and I appreciate the contributions of everyone. I do want to acknowledge the public who have been very engaged, not just in our meeting, but in this process over the last 7 years. So thank you to everyone who has participated as well. Chair, 6 days after I was first elected, John Baird dropped the bomb on us that this was going to be gifted, the land right across the street. I certainly didn't see it coming, no advance notice. And there was a strong reaction, strong uproar that agricultural land was going to be given up for the hospital. And so, and what happened in the year that followed as Catherine McKenna ran for election and she visited more and more residents, she heard more and more opposition to giving agricultural land that's used for research and training and education for this purpose. So she committed to reviewing how the site was selected and other viable potential sites. And so that the whole hospital project was put on pause for a couple of years. And I really appreciate working with Councillor Leaper, my colleague who borders much of River Ward. He hosts the current hospital and we have worked with the hospital since day one. And in those early years, it was very difficult to get the hospital to come into the community and talk with us and talk with our residents. And I think because the hospital didn't know what direction they were going in. You had the federal candidate saying that they were going to put a pause and the actual pause went on there. So that review happened. Tunney's Pasture was selected. And both the federal government and Ottawa Hospital ultimately said that's not the ideal location. That's the not optimal location. And they settled on the current location that we have now. But to the public's point and question, Chair and colleagues, both parties could have been much more clear and transparent about why the current location is their preferred choice. And I do believe both parties have an obligation to explain to the public why this location is their preferred choice. And just explain that to the public and provide more details and information, because I think that's why there's a number of people who are upset with the site and process, is that lack of openness and transparency. And so those have been legitimate questions that I've heard. Originally, the request was for 35 acres. And in one of Councillor Menard's motions, he makes reference to a motion I passed or council passed back in 2018 that looked at preserving those remaining 50 acres for green space, for trees, for patient care, for the public to get out and use that, whether it be in gardens or some sort of area that would be set aside and used as part of the hospital campus, which we all agree is important. So I think the hospital's intentions have always been good. Obviously, 3 years ago or 4 years ago, they didn't know the details of the land. They had not assessed the land to the extent that they have since then. And obviously, if they found out the challenges of building an underground parking garage, they had to assess that in their decision making. And I'm not defending that decision. I just think that intentions 4 years ago obviously can change when you get more information and you see what the impacts are of proceeding with certain things, certain initiatives. I do want to thank the hospital for coming into the community for many years, speaking with my residents. I've hosted a number of meetings, information and consultation, and that's been very helpful. And, unsolicited, the Carlington Community Association, which is River Ward's abutting association to the farm, endorses the site plan. They sent in a letter that said they support this. And that is based on their own discussions, and they sent that in. And we heard from Paul Johannes, Green Space Alliance, who follows a number of green space matters in the city, who also supports the site plan. He has concerns. He certainly has issues. No site plan is perfect, but again, a body that follows a significant amount of projects or developments in the city supports that as well. I think there's a lot of pushback as well, Chair, because for many Ottawa residents, they have a strong emotional attachment to the experimental farm. I'm a native Ottawan. I've come to the farm, without exaggeration, thousands of times, starting as a little kid with my dad. I think I've been every square inch of the farm, and I have many positive memories of the entire farm. And when land on that farm is threatened, even for a hospital, many people react negatively to that. Yes, there are the benefits of the trees and green space, but there's this opposition to any threat to those lands. And I thank the committee for approving the motion that's going to ask the mayor to approach the federal government for protection. Right now, there is no shield. There is no protection for these lands. And when I have written to the agriculture minister, the former minister, Lawrence McCauley, on 2 occasions, and I said, what is the criteria that you use? Obviously, we can understand the public good or the public benefits of having a hospital. But obviously I'm sure they're asked a number of times to yield just a little bit of land here and there for other purposes, but the federal government does not make that available. They acknowledged the significance of the experimental farm, they acknowledge the historic values, but they've never committed to advancing that with legislation. And I think the farm is very vulnerable. I think as we proceed in the future with future governments, that land could be vulnerable. We absolutely need protection, and I'm very happy in that regard. So I've always committed to working with the hospital, that if this is the site that the federal government and hospital decided on, obviously I want to work with them to make this happen. And I really want to thank my neighboring colleagues, not just Councillor Leeper, but Councillors Menard and McKenney and all councillors who've been engaged and immersed themselves in this issue. I thank you. Obviously, it doesn't end today. There will be site-specific site plans that come back, but this is a near decade-long project, so we have a lot of runway left. So, Chair, I appreciate that a lot of work obviously has gone into this. Many years will continue, and I just want to thank everyone, including the public, for their work in this regard. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington, and thank you, members of the committee. Obviously, I see I think Councillor King's been kind of tuning in too. Obviously, he was here with us all day Friday, and thank you to staff. We've got a few of these meetings coming up, these longer meetings. I can't even tell you. Councillor Gower knows the legislative agenda coming up for planning committee. We went through an hour meeting, and then staff said, okay, so here's what's coming in November. The first hour was just it's quite something. So we've got a lot ahead of us next month. So big appreciation to staff and everyone that help us get through these things. So is there any desire to vote on the motion separately, or are we good to vote on it all as one? I don't see anyone.
Can you just post it, Chair? Just make sure we're all post the motion, please, for the staff recommendation.
Yeah. Up on the screen. I'm going to read it. So. Are you? There we go. I don't know if it's just mine that's slow. Hopefully everything's fine, because my computer did tell me that my connection is unstable. Apparently even my direct North Core connection at my office is unstable. Such is life. All right, so the item before us, so that's actually the item it's okay. That's the item that came to the joint committee. That's actually not the item on this agenda, but it's the same idea. So that plan committee recommend council endorse the master site plan approval of the Ottawa Hospital as shown in document 2, and as conditioned and described in documents 5 and 6. B, reinstate delegated authority to finalize the details of the master site plan and agreement in accordance with this report. And C, approve an amendment to zoning map of zoning bylaw 2008-250 to remove the holding symbol over 930 Carling Avenue and 520 Preston Street as detailed in document 7. And that 2, planning committee approve the consultation details section of this report. So on the item, we will do yeas and nays.
Councillor Dudas.
Councillor Jess did advise that she was going to be absent between 9:45 and 11, unfortunately.
Apologies for that, Chair. Councillor Tierney.
Yes.
Councillor Leeper.
No.
Councillor Brockington.
Yes.
Councillor Menard.
No.
Councillor Coutier.
Oui.
Councillor Kitts.
Yes.
Councillor Hubley. Councillor Moffat.
Yes.
Chair Moffat and Chair Gower.
Yes.
6 yeas, 3 nays.
You want to give me that 3 again?
6 yeas, 3 nays.
2 nays.
Who's the third nay?
Councillors Dudas, Leeper.
No, Councillors Dudas isn't here.
Apologies. Councillors Leeper and Menard, 2 nays.
6-2. For Councillor Dudas, she just had to step out for a bit, and she gets called a no. Oh, Eric, I'll let it slide.
Appreciate it, Chair.
All right, so that is that. The item will rise to council on October 13th. And with that, we are adjourned.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone.